Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of our Circle of Excellence around ERP. I'm joined in typical fashion by Peter Jekyll of HandsFree ERP, Wayne Sadin of PriceSmart, the CIO, and Kenny Mulligan, CIO of Paragon Films. As I've mentioned in other episodes of this program, this is a joint collaboration between Dynamics Communities, Summit North America, Acceleration Economy, where a number of us are practitioner, analyst, and advisory board members, as well as HandsFree ERP. So today we're going to actually start to dig into the ERP budget, both the planning process for ERP budgets, how you try to maintain and manage and mitigate massive creep in your scope of work and those sorts of things. And then also how you're managing some of those discussions internally with stakeholders and setting expectations and all that sort of stuff. Now, all of us have lived through a whole bunch of ERP implementations. Some of us have just finished some, right? Some of us are now getting ready to go on a brand new journey of a big one, which Wayne's going to be in the middle of. But hey, Kenny, I'd love to kick things off with you to start us off. You know, you just have gone through, as we've mentioned in a couple of other episodes, a big migration to D365 finance and supply chain in a cloud ERP environment. You know, as you started this, I guess you call it a modernization project for Paragon Films, how did you work with your executive committee to define the budget to kind of kick you into first gear?
Well, in retrospect, apparently not very well. What we did is we took the estimate from our implementation partner, and then we added in about 50% to that for ISVs and Azure costs and the kind of things that they weren't including, and then threw another 20% on. Thought that would be plenty of overage. And then that was kind of the budget that was approved. And then, of course, once we got into it, found that overages and things took it far beyond that. So, but we didn't do as much due diligence as we should have on that one.
Kenny, what were a few of those sort of key hidden costs that ended up creeping up in the project?
Yeah, so I guess so much of it was just an underestimation of what it was going to take to really pull this project off. I think that it was kind of viewed as more of an upgrade. We'd already been on Dynamics AX 2012, and so it seemed like it was more or less upgrading, lift and shift into the cloud, not a full re-implementation. And so the customizations that had to be redone, 7 years worth of customizations in AX 2012 that were now having to be redone a completely different way with a different kind of framework, as well as just all of the integrations where instead of us having this convenient SQL database on the back end that you could just tie other things into through ODBC connections or something. Now all of a sudden we have to create these logic apps and Power Automate flows in order to get information back and forth. Add to that the fact that all of our BI is in Power BI and in a data warehouse that's local, and we now have to also worry about integrating to get that data for reporting through. So there was a lot more involved in that. And then I think another big one was data migration. Just far underestimated what it would take to migrate existing data from what seemed like the same system, just a later version, but it didn't turn out to be so much. But data migration was a big underestimate too.
Yeah, we're going to be diving deeper into the data migration issue in a future episode here. So Kenny, we'll be unpacking that one with you here in another week or two. Hey, Wayne, I'm sure a lot of that sounds familiar, right? From what Kenny's talking through with some of those hidden costs. But I wanna slightly go in a different direction here with you for a minute, because oftentimes, Kenny talked about a little bit of his contingency strategy within the budget of having that plus 20% and that sort of thing. But a lot of times, organizations lose sight of this or don't properly create, the levels of estimate that they should against those contingency projects. How do you manage this with boards and executive committees to make sure that you're actually doing it the right way?
Well, first of all, let's comment on how you do a contingency budget. I'm going to put this in two categories. There are the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. So the known unknowns are how much is it going to cost to migrate data? How much is it going to cost to do the things that you could make a list of? My first advice there is work with an implementation partner that has done this. work with a Peter, work with a Wayne when I was a consultant, because the categories in my budget include things like backfill cost. If I need a senior accounting manager to come out into the project for 6 months, I may have to go to a big four and pay a senior manager $400 an hour to go backfill a controller. I have a project coming up where I have to pay some travel expenses that aren't in the department's budget. So if you start making a list of these things and put money into them, you will at least be putting money towards your known unknowns. How much travel? I don't know. Let's put a number. The other thing that I think is very important and companies underestimate all the time is OCM, Organization Change Management. What is it going to cost to change the hearts and minds of the X number of 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 people that have their comfortable way of doing business and now have to be shown the new way and why the new way is helping them be more productive or serve their customers better or what have you? So ignoring OCM means you wind up with a successful software transition and a failed project. So think of it as your marketing budget. And those are all your known unknowns. Besides that, I put an explicit line in my project called contingency. I don't bury it into the budget. I say, this is a measure of what I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I'll typically put in a project that's a normal project, a 25% contingency when I start. My assumption is as I define what I'm doing, I can narrow that number down and take the 25 maybe to 20 or 15 or 10 as I learn more and go down to through the project. I did a big ERP project. In fact, my client was a CFO. I put 25% on. He created another line called CFO contingency and threw 10% on top of that. And then when we took it to the board put a board contingency of 10% on top of the other two contingencies. So we had 3. And I will tell you what, we burned through all of them.
Is that right?
But
Wow.
we didn't go over. And so I think your question is also, how do you stay on budget and work with the partners?
For sure.
And that is, first of all, you got to have a PMO. You got to have somebody that knows what all the money is being spent as it's being spent. You got to have absolutely draconian change management. If it isn't in the spec, and you may have an agile methodology where you're saying, I have 4 ways to pay a bill. We're going to pick one of them. But that doesn't give you the budget to create a 5th category. And you're going to be darn careful not to do that sort of thing very often. So it's about managing what you're asking, understanding the implications of requests, and recognizing that if you have an implementation partner who charges T&M, time and materials, they're not in the business of helping you. They're in the business of billing. That's how they get paid. That's how they make partner. So recognize that you as the client may be at odds with the implementation partner. I had one where somebody did an ERP that was like re-implemented backwards to the way the vendor designed the product. And their implementation partner said, sure, we can do that. Of course, it's software. We can make it do whatever you want. And they spent millions and millions of dollars because the client asked for something. The implementation partner went, no problem.
Yeah.
And you know what? At the end, they threw the whole thing away and stopped and started again. So the way to do it is manage what you're building and don't just go, what a good idea. Let's try that.
Yeah.
That's not agile. That's chaos.
Chaos is exactly right. And Peter, this plays a lot into a lot of the discussions that you and I have been having about that role of the partner within the context of projects like this to ensure both a keen understanding of what can happen and what can't happen, instead of trying to pretend like what can't happen can happen, right? Which is kind of what Wayne was just talking through. But before we go to that, Wayne, I just want to mention, it's obvious as a CIO, you've been there before, right? With wanting to build that 25% contingency budget in. It's also evident that the CFO you were working with had been there before to say, hey, okay, this is my CFO budget. What's kind of cool, because you don't hear it that often, is that the board was looking at it the same way. Say, we're going to add in another 10%, right, to be a part of this. So I love that point, and that's something that I'm going to encourage all of our viewers to share with other folks inside their organization, because that's a tried and true sort of example of individuals and organizations that have been there before and learn from that, right? Apply that sort of thinking. Peter, how would you, Wayne called you out there a minute ago as an implementation expert, right, to come in and help with some of this. How would you help Kenny and Wayne through this process and try to ensure that things were done, quite frankly, the right way?
So I'm going to tell you something shocking. I have literally told potential customers that I don't care what their budget is. And the reason for that is because it's a feel good number that is derived internally. And once it's put out into the universe of potential partners, they then shoot at that budget. And if they know darn well it's going to take twice as much work, they're going to come in with a proposal that meets that budget, because they figure once our foot's in the door, we'll just change order these guys to death. So I believe the one saying in my career that I've come up with is that nobody has the budget to do things right, but everybody has the cash to do things over. So the approach that I take is, guys, here is a list of activities that generally have to be accomplished to do this task. There's no magic. Some people do it faster, some people do it slower, some people do it with better resources, some people don't. But here's the thing. Here's what has to get done. Now, we're either going to do it all for you, or you're going to help us with it. Now, if you want to assign some kind of a number to that list of tasks, that's fine. But for me, the minute you throw out that budget number, it's an invitation for bad proposals. And let me give you 2 examples of where costs get hidden. You guys mentioned one of them: data conversion and integrations. Here's what typically happens when those budget numbers start getting high. A partner will say, "Oh, you guys have an IT department? You can do data conversions, can't you?" "Oh, yes, we can." "Oh, and those integrations, you guys can write those, right?" "Yes, tally ho, let's go forward." And as sure as day follows night halfway through the project, "Oh my God, we don't have the internal resources, the time and the effort or the skill set to do data migration. Can you guys help us?" "Oh, we'd be happy to do it." And so that's that automatic built-in hidden cost that nobody understands up front, but that everybody on my side realizes that somewhere down the road, that thing's going to be thrown down on my side. So I look at budgets differently.
Well, and I think it's a good learning exercise for all of us, because we've got I've been a CEO a few times, right? Been through a bunch of these projects like all of us have, but what you are forced to do within the context of any business plan is create a budget for it, right? I think the trick has to be, hey, maybe you don't share all of that budget or the context of that budget within the partners that you're working with, and you instead wait for them to come back to you with a proposal. I think is where Peter's going there, and Wayne, you're nodding your head, so it seems like you're agreeing with that. Let's kind of in typical fashion, we're starting to butt up against time here, right? For when we get together and start talking. Peter, what are your top 2 tips for somebody that are starting to go through this management of their budget process? Top 2 quickly.
Yeah, you're probably going to get 3 types of proposals, and be ready to recognize them. There's the shock and awe proposal, which is, we don't really have time to deal with these guys, but let's throw out $1 million, and if they bite, okay, we'll deal with them. There's the low ball, which is the, if we get our foot in the door, we'll change order them to death. And then there's kind of that well thought out, here's what we think it's actually going to take. Be able to understand that if there are wide discrepancies between proposals, figure out why those are there and what it is that you're dealing with out of those 3 types.
Really good tip. Wayne, over to you. Top 1 or 2 tips.
Don't share your budget with your implementation partners for the reasons Peter said. It's like buying a car. When you go into the dealer and they say, "What kind of payment do you want?" They're selling you a payment, not a car. And so I never tell them. The other one is, I don't write the 1,000-page RFP. I say to each implementation partner, tell me how you're going to do it. I want an implementation partner that thinks like we do.
Yeah.
the worst thing you can do is force an ERP into an organization it doesn't fit in. The second worst thing is to force an implementation style into an organization. When you have an impedance mismatch, you're always going to be fighting. You don't want a partner you're fighting with. You want a partner that is a partner.
Love it, Wayne. Great tips. Kenny, over to you.
Well, just like Peter said, we didn't take a budget to the implementation partner. It wasn't that they were trying to meet what our budget was. We said, we don't have any idea. We don't do these things. You tell us what it's going to cost. And so they did a whole whole assessment project to determine what that cost was. And they still shot way, way, way low. So my best advice is, don't trust your implementation partner to tell you what they're going to cost, because just like Peter said, they want to give you a low enough number that gets their foot in the door, knowing that once you're halfway through it, you'll have to pay whatever it takes. So my best advice, and I've given it on the other episodes that we did, get a third party who's not interested in selling you anything to help you figure out whether it's a realistic price. They can look through all the details. They can tell you the things that were left out of the SOW. They can tell you whether you're missing some things and help you come up with a reasonable number that will, be a lot closer to what you need.
Awesome advice and tips, gang. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to our circle of excellence around ERP and our continuous steps of how you actually try to get this stuff right, including this one on budgets. Stay tuned for our next episode, which is going to tackle one of those topics we just spent a little bit of time talking about in this one, data readiness, and really thinking about a checklist approach of how you can make sure that you've got the right things set at the beginning. You're not going to have everything, right? But have the right list of known unknowns, right, as opposed to unknown unknowns, to quote my friend Wayne. Everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. Wayne, Peter, and Kenny, thanks.